This is the confusing hotel. It was night when I found it. A night so quiet that seemed to be listening. The moon was hidden and the stars blinked like secrets in the sky. I don't know how I came here to stand at its doors. Maybe I was lost. Maybe I was searching for something I couldn't name. Maybe I have always been here, in one form or another. The lobby was dimly lit, and the air had a smell of old wood, like dreams left too long in the dark. A long hallway was stretched away. Doors were lined up like questions. A whisper was calling me forward. I took a breath and I entered inside. This, I realized, was a dream. Its quiet halls and the waiting rooms felt like a map of my life, like every step might reveal something I had forgotten or something I had never known. Let's walk together. Let's see what hides behind those doors. I opened the first door and I entered the room. The room was filled with paintings that were trying to whisper a story. A woman named Mira was there. She had painting brush in her hands. Her eyes were dark, but they shone with the light of thought. She was painting like she was searching for something she has never seen. I asked, "Why do you paint?" She paused and said, "I paint to capture the truth that hides beneath the surface, the truth that words cannot reach." I looked at the canvas and I saw a face, half remembered, half forgotten. "We all paint our lives," I said, "but the meaning is between the strokes, in the colors we choose and the shadows we hide." She nodded and her eyes were brightened. "Maybe we will never see the whole," she whispered, "but we feel it in the art of creating." I left her there, still painting and still searching, and I felt the weight of the room's truth stay with me as I walked away. I opened the next door and I entered a room with a single chair. An old man named Eldon was sitting in the center of the room, lost in his thoughts, lost in time. I asked, "Who are you waiting for?" He looked at me and said, "Maybe someone, maybe no one, maybe myself, or maybe the sound of my own heartbeat." I sat beside him on the wet floor and we were listening to the silence. Each breath felt like a question we couldn't answer. "Solitude," I said, "is not lack of people. It is the weight of your own soul in a still room." He nodded, and silence felt deeper, richer. I left him there, and I carried that stillness and silence with me. I opened the next door, and I entered a room filled with clocks. They ticked and talked, filling the air with the language of time and measure. A woman named Astra moved among them, her fingers twisting the hands of each clock with a kind of desperation. I asked, "Why do you keep them running?" She looked at me with her eyes filled with the weight of every second. "If I stop, everything will fall apart," she said. "If I let them sleep, who am I without their boundaries?" I touched one clock. It stopped ticking, and for a moment, the room felt its breath. "Time is not just in clocks," I said. "It is in how we spend it, in the moments between the ticks." She closed her eyes, and I left her in the stillness of the room. I opened the next door, and I entered a room full with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different face, a different truth. A man named Nocturne was standing there. His face was hidden in a shadow. I asked, "Why do you hide?" He touched a mirror and his reflection splintered. "I'm afraid of what I will see," he said. I looked myself in the mirror and I saw my own shadows shift. "The truth is not always pretty," I said, "but it's yours. Even the darkness is part of us." He nodded, and I left him with the truth of his own reflection. I opened the next door and I entered a room that seemed to hold voices. The air was thick with words, whispers that had no sparkles, memories that were not mine. A woman named Alira was standing in the corner. Her eyes were closed as she was listening to the weight of the air. I asked, "Whose voices do you hear?" She opened her eyes and said, "The voices of the past, the thoughts that never rest." I sat beside her and we listened to the room. We were hearing voices that seemed to belong to everyone and no one at all. "Echoes never die," she whispered. "They just fade into the silence." I left her there, and I carried the echoes with me in the next room. I opened the next door, and I entered a room filled with masks, each one hanging like a story untold. A woman named Wella was there. She was wearing a mask that glimmered in the light. I asked her, "Why do you wear a mask?" She said, "We all wear masks to hide the fear of being seen, to become the person the others want to see." I looked around, and each mask had a different face, a different truth. "But underneath," I said, "who are you?" She removed the mask slowly and revealed her own eyes, tired but alive. "I am everything I fear," she said, "and everything I hope to become." I nodded, and I left her there, the room filled with stories we say and stories we never do. I opened the next door and I entered the room with twisting hallways that seemed to switch with every step. A figure named Orion was walking, marking each turn with a line of stones. I asked, "Why do you mark these paths?" "I'm seeking the center of myself," he said. "The place where the labyrinth ends and the truth begins." I followed him through the turning ways, the air filled with the sound of my own footsteps. "The labyrinth," I said, "is life itself. Every path, a choice. Every turn, a question." I smiled, and I left him searching for the center. I opened the next door, and I entered a room full of ashes. A figure named Amber was standing there. Her hands were glowing with the light of rebirth. I asked her, "Why do you burn?" She said, "To be born again, to rise from my own ruins." I watched her gather the ashes, sowing them like seeds into the earth, and flames burned slowly around her hands. "We all must fall to rise," I said. "We all must let go to begin anew." She smiled, and I left her there burning, promising that every end is a new beginning. I opened the next door, and I entered a room full of old photographs and journals. The air smelled like dust and ink that was holding memories. A man named Finn was sitting in the corner. He was turning pages very slowly, as he was afraid he would disappear. I asked, "Why do you keep these moments?" "To remind myself who I was," he said. "To see how I changed." I looked at the pictures, at the faces half forgotten, half still there. "Memories," I said, "are maps that show where we have been and what we have become. He nodded and he smiled. I left him there. I opened the next door and I entered a room filled with soft light that seemed to be shining from everywhere. A woman named Sola was standing in the center. Her hands were outstretched as she was holding the light herself. I asked her, "Why do you stand in the light?" She said, "Light is the truth that touches everything, even the darkest places." I felt the light on my own face, and I understood that light sometimes can be the only way to find ourselves. I left her there standing in the light, and I walked towards the next room. I opened the next door and I entered a room filled with shadows that were moving like whispers. A woman named Shade was standing there. Her hands were drawing shapes in the air, shapes that flickered and vanished. I asked her, "What do you see here in the shadows?" "I see the pieces of the world that go unseen," she said. "The thoughts we never speak, the dreams we never share." I was watching her hands moving, the shapes changing, and I understood that sometimes the most real things are the ones we cannot see. I left her there, in the room that seemed so dark but so alive, and I went to the next door. I opened the next door and I entered a room where dreams were floating like clouds, soft and shimmering. A woman named Luna was standing there, her eyes filled with the light of stars. I asked, "What are these dreams?" She said, "These are the fears and the hopes of every soul that walked this hall." I touched one dream, and it shivered like a wish about to be spoken. "Dreams," I said, "are the windows of our hearts." She smiled, and I left her there. The room filled with the sound of every dream we dare to hold. I opened the next door, and I entered a room that was not a room, but an endless space filled with lights and shadows together. A woman named Solas was there, her hands outstretched and smile on her face. I asked, "What is this place?" "This is where we awaken," she said, "where dreams end and the journey begins anew." I looked around and I saw the doors I walked through, the rooms I left behind, and I understood that they are all part of me. "We all awaken someday," I said, "and we all carry the stories with us." She nodded. I felt myself in that moment beginning to wake up. The hotel was fading like a memory, but its lessons were still in my soul. I left that space with a heart that was both heavy and light, ready to face the world with new eyes. Every shadow we have touched, every fear we have faced, all of them are part of the journey. Yet the meaning we find is never final or universal. We are never final. There are so many more rooms to enter and so many more lessons to learn. There is no single purpose in this hotel called life, but that's what makes this journey fun. Let us carry this story in our walking lives and let us walk together.